Over 100 years ago, a philosopher named John Dewey asked this really radical question. What's education actually for? And his answer, which he laid out in his landmark book, Democracy in Education, wasn't what you might expect. It wasn't about getting a job or memorizing a ton of facts. For him, it was about something much bigger, creating people who could actually build a better, more democratic world. So today, we're going to dive into his incredible vision for what learning can and should be.
But before we get into the deep stuff, let's start with something I think pretty much all of us can relate to. Just think back for a second to your own school days. Did it ever feel, disconnected? Like it was its own little bubble, totally separate from the real, messy, interesting life happening right outside the classroom door? Well, that feeling, that exact gap, that's the problem John Dewey was so determined to solve.
Dewey looked at this disconnect, and he saw this major clash of ideas. On one side, you've got the old school way of thinking, right? The one that treats students like empty jars that just need to be filled up with information. It's all about passive absorption. But then Dewey come along with this totally different idea, a real game changer, education as an active experience. This is where you learn by actually doing things, by tackling real problems. And the biggest shift? Realizing that school isn't just getting you ready for life. Education is life, happening right now.
Okay, so how do we actually bridge that gap between school and life? For Dewey, the answer was to completely rethink what we even mean by education. He said, look, real education, the kind that actually sticks, it's a very specific type of experience.
So what did he mean by experience? Because he wasn't just talking about, running around and doing random stuff. For Dewey, a genuine experience has two key parts. First, there's the active part. That's you doing something, trying something out. Then there's the passive part. That's you feeling the results, the consequences. And the magic, the actual learning, happens when you connect the dots between those two things. Think about it. Touching a hot stove is a powerful experience, right? But it's not just because of the pain. It's because your brain makes that crucial link. I did this, and that happened. That connection is everything.
And that really gets to the core of what he's saying. See, real education isn't someone just telling you the stove is hot. No way. It's this active, hands-on process that literally changes who you are. It gives you the insight, the foresight to make smarter choices next time. An experience that truly educates you doesn't just give you a fact, it makes you a more capable person.
Okay, so if experience is like the raw material, then how do we shape it into something useful, like knowledge? Well, that brings us to Dewey's next big idea, his model for how we actually think. Thinking for him is the process of taking that raw experience and making sense of it.
And what's so powerful about this is just how practical it is. Dewey says thinking isn't some vague thing that just happens in your head. It's a method, a step-by-step process for solving problems. It all starts with a real problem, something you're actually stuck on. From there, you observe, you gather some data. Then you come up with a possible solution, an educated guess. You think it through, and here's the most important part. You go out and you test it in the real world. I mean, when you look at it, it's basically the scientific method, but for everything in life, not just for a lab.
So the big takeaway here is this. Our brains don't think with ideas that are just floating around in a vacuum. That's not how it works. We think with the real stuff of the world, with actions, with facts, with events, and how they all connect. Our minds are at their sharpest, not when we're detached from everything, but when we're completely immersed in figuring out how life actually works.
And this idea leads us to another one of Dewey's really profound insights. Think about it. If learning comes from active experience, then the place where that experience happens, the environment, suddenly becomes the single most important educational tool there is.
Dewey puts it this way, and it's such a powerful thought. He says, we never educate anyone directly.
It's always been direct. It happens by means of the environment. Now, here's the kicker. He says whether we permit chance environments to do the work or whether we design environments for the purpose makes a great difference. Wow. So what he's really saying is that the main job of a teacher or a parent isn't to pour information into someone's head. It's to be an architect of experiences. To design an environment that sparks curiosity and encourages thinking. In a way, the environment itself does the teaching.
This also helps us understand a really key difference he makes between training and education. It's a big one. You can train a dog, right? You use treats or commands to change its outward behavior, but you haven't educated it. Education for Dewey is something way deeper. It happens when a person actually understands and shares in the why of what they're doing. It's about being a partner in the whole thing. It doesn't just change what you do, it shapes who you are on the inside, your mindset, your beliefs, how you see everything. So if education is this whole active hands-on process, then what's the point? Where are we trying to get to? For Dewey, the answer is so simple it's almost poetic. The goal of education is just more education. The only real end goal is growth, just continuing to grow.
I mean, this is a huge shift from how we usually think about it, right? We tend to see education as a thing you complete. You graduate, you're done, but Dewey says, no, that's not it at all. A healthy person is always growing, always learning. It doesn't just stop when you get your diploma. Sure, the way an adult grows is different from how a child grows, but the process never ends. It's a lifelong journey. It's not a finish line you cross.
And this is where he really takes a shot at the traditional system. He says, look, the moment you set up some fixed goal that's outside the learning itself, like getting a good grade on a test or just getting the degree, you have to start using external tricks to get people there. Things like grades, rewards, punishments. And what happens, he argued? That this actually stops real growth in its tracks. The real aim should be to foster a love of growing that is its own reward.
Okay, so you might be thinking, this is all great for schools, but why does it matter to the rest of us? Well, here's where it all comes together. For Dewey, every single one of these ideas about education was tied to something much, much bigger: the survival and the health of a democratic society. Because you see, for him, democracy wasn't just about showing up to vote every few years. Not at all. It's a way of living together. And it only works if people from all different backgrounds can find common ground, share their interests, and talk to each other freely. To have a healthy democracy, you absolutely need citizens who can think for themselves, who can work together to solve problems, and who are flexible enough to adapt when things change.
And so this means the most important job a school has is to be a kind of miniature society, a little embryonic community, as he called it. It has to be a place where kids from different races, different religions, different families can come together and learn how to actually live with one another, how to share a purpose, and how to build a common world. The classroom in this vision is literally the practice field for democracy.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it. Dewey wrote this over a century ago, but his ideas feel like they could have been written yesterday. So, the big question is, how do we take all this wisdom and actually use it today? You know, in our own lives, whether we're students, parents, teachers, or just lifelong learners.
So let's break it down into 4 core principles we can start with. First, let's prioritize doing things over just listening, real, hands-on projects. Second, let's stop treating knowledge like a stamp collection, something you just accumulate. Instead, see it as a toolbox for figuring out the future. Third, let's work on breaking down that wall between school learning and life learning. They should flow into each other. And finally, number 4, let's focus on building what you could call social intelligence, that skill of being able to connect with others and work together on things that matter.
When you really let it sink in, Dewey's message is incredibly liberating, isn't it? It frees us from that old, stressful idea that education is this task you have to finish, this mountain of facts you have to memorize. And in its place, he gives us this beautiful vision of life as one long, continuous adventure, an adventure of growth, of discovery, and of finding purpose together. Because in the end, the goal isn't to be learned, it's to learn how to keep on learning.